Noam Chomsky was confronted by a 9/11 truther when he was speaking at the University of Florida recently. And he was asked to comment about Building 7. And the guy, I have video of this. We're not the types of people on this show that blindly follow Noam Chomsky. We barely even discuss Noam Chomsky on this program. I think this is very interesting because of the crowd reaction and how Noam Chomsky handled it. We're going to pick up the video and the audio about a minute into the question. It's very common that at these events, when you're told to ask a question, you first do 1 to 2 minutes of kind of like lead ups or setting it up until you eventually get to the question. I'm going to cut out all the lead up. We're going to get to the actual question about Building 7 and then Noam Chomsky's response. Check it out.
Are you ready to come forward and jump on board with 9/11? I know you've mentioned it's a distraction, but there's no better case of the media covering up things than not presenting Building 7, that third building. We've all seen the other towers fall, but what about Building 7, Noam?
Well, in fact, you're right that there's a consensus among a minuscule number of architects and engineers, tiny number, a couple of them are perfectly serious. They are not doing what scientists and engineers do when they think they've discovered something. What you do, when you think you've discovered something, what you do is write articles in scientific journals, give talks at the professional societies, go to the civil engineering department at MIT or Florida or wherever you are, and present your results, and then proceed to try to convince the national academies, the professional society of physicists and civil engineers, the departments in the major universities, convince them that you've discovered something. Now, there happen to be a lot of people around who spent an hour on the internet and think they know a lot of physics, but it doesn't work like that. There's a reason why there are.
So this was a very interesting exchange to me, Lewis. First, saying if you just look on the internet for an hour, you don't know physics. That's number one. And this applies, I think, to a lot of conspiracy theories, where just looking up a few things on the internet and reading what other experts who you have not personally vetted in any way say, and then saying it's obviously accurate, that seems to be a flaw with a lot of conspiratorial thinking. But he also noted that the Bush administration blamed the 9/11 attacks on Saudi hijackers. And it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, which is, if the U.S. government staged these attacks to invade Iraq, wouldn't they just have easily blamed the attacks on Iraq or Iraqis so that now we don't have this obvious bungling where they went into Iraq for something nobody from Iraq did? You'd think they would have put together the staging in a much more logical manner.
Right. And of course, still, the vast majority of the reasoning for going into Iraq was these supposed weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
It wasn't hijackers.
The other thing that I found very interesting was that Noam Chomsky said the real way that these so-called experts would get their information out is you publish properly in scientific journals. He's making a good point, but there's kind of an easy retort to that from conspiracists, which is, no. The scientific journals are colluding to keep these articles out. That's part of the suppression tactic that's going on. So while I agree with Noam Chomsky on that, there's a very simple answer from the conspiracist, which is, of course, you're not going to see the articles in the scientific journals. That's part of the conspiracy so that nobody finds out.
I'm sure if the person who asked the question had a chance to respond, that's what would have been said.